Now we're going to talk about ecology and what animals need to survive. And after that, if we are going to talk about what different animals need, it is good to start with a good example, namely the falcon. The falcon needs food and nutrients to survive, and it gets that by hunting small birds. But small birds also need nutrients to survive, and they need to do the same. However, they hunt something smaller, such as insects, butterflies, and larvae. The insects, butterflies, and larvae do not eat other living animals. Instead, they eat various types of plants. These plants, such as fruits, nuts, grass, leaves, and roots, need sunlight, carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients to grow and produce their food. And when we draw who eats whom, as we have done here, we get a food chain. It is called a netting kedja. That is what this model is called. And all animals and plants are part of a food chain. But for a food chain to work, we need to replace the names at the different levels. It works for several different animals. At the bottom are all the plants and similar things called producers. They do not need to eat any other animals but produce their own food. So, fruits, nuts, grass, leaves, and roots are included there. And those that eat the plants, the producers, which we have now learned are called producers, are called primary consumers because they are the first to eat the plants. In Swedish, this is called Förstahandskonsument. Those that eat the primary consumers are called secondary consumers. So we are, so to speak, 2 steps up in the food chain. We are at the secondary consumer level, and here we have the example of small birds that eat the primary consumers, such as insects, butterflies, and larvae. In Swedish, this is called Andrahandskonsument. At the very top, where we have found the falcon, we have our top consumer. It is called the top consumer because there is no one that eats it. It has no natural enemies. It is at the top. Its main concern is finding enough secondary consumers to survive. It does not need to worry about being eaten by another animal, as it has no enemies. In Swedish, this is called Toppkonsument. And now that we have the proper names, we can replace these names with other animals. This allows us to create a food chain with different animals. For example, we could use a lion or a whale instead of a falcon. For example, here we have the wolf as another example. The wolf is a top consumer with no natural enemies. The wolf, in turn, eats the fox, which is our secondary consumer. The fox eats the primary consumer, which is the hare. All plants and similar organisms are producers, as we have said, and here we have blueberries. They do not eat any other animals, but produce their own food. And a top consumer is not immortal, even though it has no natural predators. It does not live forever. When a top consumer dies, what we call decomposers break it down and release nutrients that producers use to grow. For example, when the wolf dies, earthworms and other decomposers eat it, releasing nutrients that blueberry bushes can use as nourishment. In this way, we get a cycle. Naturally, if a fox dies in the forest, earthworms and other decomposers will also eat it. So, it is not only top consumers that are broken down by decomposers, but the entire food chain. However, this is often how a top consumer's life ends. So here's the thing. The wolf has a more varied diet than just foxes. It also eats hares, as Zlatan points out here. And that's absolutely true. The wolf doesn't just eat hares. It also eats voles. And the fox eats both blueberries and other things. When we look at this from a broader perspective, we move away from the concept of a food chain and instead consider the concept of a food web. It is called a näringsväv in Swedish. For example, the wolf eats both a fox and a hare, and a vole. This is called a food web, and we can draw lines to show that the fox eats both the hare and the blueberries, just as this character down here suggests. So that was the food web. But if we go back to our food chain, we can see that it has a special shape. It is shaped somewhat like a pyramid. This is because there is much more biomass the further down you go in the pyramid. In our food pyramid, as we see here, we want to show how much biomass, how much living material must exist at each level for the next level to survive. For example, if we have fruits, nuts, grass, leaves, and roots, there must be a lot of them for the insects, butterflies, and larvae to survive. For there to be a top consumer, there must be much more biomass below for the food pyramid to function properly. And what is biomass here? That is a very reasonable question, Zlatan. Biomass is all the matter that makes up living organisms. However, only about 10% of the biomass at each trophic level is transferred to the next level. Each level in the pyramid becomes nourishment for the next level, which means more biomass is needed at the lower levels to support the higher levels. For example, how much food is needed for the falcons to eat? Let's say the falcons need 10 kilograms of food. There must be 100 kilograms of small birds, since only 10% of the small bird's biomass translates to 10 kilograms of food for the falcon. Ultimately, we will need 10 tons of fruits, nuts, grass, leaves, and roots for the falcons to be able to eat the small birds. The further down we go in the pyramid, the more biomass is required for the food pyramid to function. If the falcon needs 10 kilograms of food, we need 100 kilograms of small birds, and at the very bottom, we need 10 tons of fruits, nuts, grass, leaves, and roots for the nutrients to travel all the way up to the falcon. Back to the decomposers. Where do they fit in, wonders Zlatan? For this, we need to bring in another character, and here is how it works. When an animal or plant dies, many living organisms begin to eat and break it down. For example, earthworms are decomposers. Taking the wolf as our example, these decomposers, or Nedbrytare, can include worms, fungi, and bacteria. When these decomposers eat the dead animal, they release many substances, including nutrients that plants can absorb to grow. So, nutrients are released. When a wolf dies, a tree can then use the nutrients from the wolf to grow. What we see here is that the dead wolf is broken down by decomposers, and the nutrients help the tree to grow. Zlatan thinks that the decomposers alone make the plants grow, but it's not quite like that. The nutrients released by the decomposers are only part of what makes a tree grow. We need to delve into something very important, namely photosynthesis. For a plant or tree to live, 4 things are required. It needs nutrients, which it gets from the wolf and the decomposers. It needs sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, which it absorbs from the air. With all these, the plant will grow and produce glucose and oxygen. So the plant takes in nutrients, sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, and it produces oxygen and glucose. This process is called photosynthesis. It's a very important process to understand when studying biology. When plants use sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to produce oxygen and glucose, we call this photosynthesis. It's something that will appear on many biology exams, and it's essential knowledge. Now, as we approach the end of this video, you can look at the list on the left. It contains crucial topics you need to understand. You should have knowledge about what a food chain is. It's important to know how nutrients and energy flow from one organism to another. Understanding what a food web is and how different food chains are interconnected is also essential. You need to be familiar with what an energy pyramid is and how it shows the flow of energy in an ecosystem. Finally, it's important to be able to explain photosynthesis and how plants convert light energy into chemical energy. If you feel that you lack knowledge about any part, you can rewatch the video. Additionally, you need to be familiar with the terms The terms are translated from Swedish to your language in the video description. Check the description to make sure you understand all the terms. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see the next video, you can click here above.